Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Interfaith Paths to Peace. This is our 3 o'clock community conversation time. Each week we host a different community conversation and invite people to talk about important topics. And I'm really excited. Today we are definitely talking about a really important and emerging conversation around the new sanctuary movement. And it's actually the new sanctuary movement. Sanctuary movement has taken a variety of iterations, and just recently here in Louisville there was a new kind of dynamic added to the sanctuary movement, and we're going to explore that, but would also really be interested in our community having conversations around the issues related to sanctuary movement. We've got several religious leaders. Corey Shapiro with the ACLU is here to answer some legal, or maybe not answer questions, but invite us into some of these legal questions and how to think about that. But specifically, we have Lori Kyle, Reverend Lori Kyle, who is the pastor of First Unitarian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, and was the location of offering sanctuary to protesters over the last few days here in Louisville, Kentucky. And so I thought we would start. We'll have an opportunity for everyone to ask questions and engage in conversation, but really wanted to start by listening to Lori share the experience of what happened when the last several nights, but kind of give us a feeling of what began to emerge, which has now become a national and a global issue around how faith leaders, religious communities, houses of worship can support protests. And another issue, another dynamic around civil disobedience. And there are all kinds of issues that are showing up around this. And we hope this to be a community conversation and a dynamic and safe space for us to be able to talk about those issues. So I want to turn it over to you, Lori. First of all, big thanks to you for such a time as this. I think we use the theological understanding that those of us in religious leadership, there are moments where we step into our faith. And I was down there on this weekend and was so amazed by what was happening there. And so, Lori, welcome. And if you could share a little bit about your story, and then we might have some questions for you. Thanks for being on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. We have indeed stepped into our Unitarian Universalist faith here at First Unitarian, but actually it's beyond Unitarian Universalism. The faith community here in Louisville and the wider community has been wonderful in their response to our efforts to offer sanctuary to the protesters. So we are privileged to be doing it and grateful for the outpouring of love and support. Just a bit of a background to how this all started. On Wednesday, most of us know, September 23rd, the AG's office issued information about the charges or lack thereof that would be coming to the officers that murdered Breonna Taylor. Our congregant, Kentucky Representative Lisa Wilner, happened to be downtown at Injustice Square around 7 p.m. And at that time, police started moving people out of the square or threatening arrest. So she called me at home to say, can we open up our church? Seems like we might need some safe space here. And we happen to have an open air courtyard on our property. So that happened. We quickly threw ourselves into gear, and people came. We threw together a portable PA system and put out chairs and made mac and cheese that we found in the corner of our kitchen to offer protesters that came. And it went that way quite organically the first night, Wednesday. Then Thursday morning, the Board of Trustees here at First U and I decided overwhelmingly that we wanted to formalize our sanctuary offering. Such was the need, clearly the need, and the protesting community was desirous of this offering. And so contacts were made, jail support, medics, shuttle services, therapy services, food preparation, supplies, donations, all started pouring in. And the experience of this has been humbling and exhausting, but certainly, as mentioned earlier, an opportunity to step into our faith. And it's been heartening to hear many people of all faiths say, this is what church should be. And it's been lovely to be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. And yeah, just what tell me what before we move on to Ryan Eller, who is also there and works with the new Moral Majority organization, can fill us in a little bit about the history of Sanctuary. But what was the most powerful or meaningful experience or part of that for you, and grounded in your tradition?
Unitarian Universalisms are a foundation of our faith is working for justice. It's interwoven into our 7 principles, very specifically mentioned in them. And so it's a natural outgrowth really for us. Before last Wednesday, we had already had in place a medic van ministry where there had been mobile medic services that were available to protesters around with the marches down at Injustice Square. We had congregants funding and delivering ice on a daily basis down to Injustice Square. So we were very involved to begin with. And this happened organically and perhaps providentially. We're here. It so suits our values as Unitarians, and we're in proximity downtown. We have the space and are just fortunate and thrilled and privileged to be able to offer it.
Now, can you share a little bit? There have been a couple of examples where that you were actually in conversation with the police, and there was some possibilities of whether the police were actually going to come onto the premises. Can you share a little bit about that conversation and what transpired there?
There was one night when the police had practically surrounded the building, and dozens of officers in riot gear lined up and quite intentional in their presence. And the energy was escalating between the protesters on the property and the police force that was especially on 4th Street, that side of the church. So I wanted to speak to the officers just to get an understanding as a leader of the church that might act as a de-escalation force, and just to gather a deeper understanding of their presence and their intentions and what we could report and expect. Their report to me was they were there simply because of some property damage to the library, which is just across the street from us. Apparently a flare had been thrown through a broken glass window, and also the police had made some arrests in the proximity of the library. And the officers, I talked to several of them on either side of the property. Identical reports were that they were simply there to support their colleagues working on the library issues, and they didn't want to abandon their colleagues, but they were anxious to be gone. And as soon as they could, as soon as the library work was done, they were happy to leave. I appreciated their availability to me and the amicability in which they approached their communications. However, I at the time and continue to find the manner of their presence in the riot gear, the numbers, the way the church had been basically surrounded, to have been grossly incongruent with their stated reasons for being there.
Yeah, thank you. And we will have some questions and opportunity, Lori, for you as well coming up. I also want to welcome Ryan Eller, who's the founder of the new new moral majority, and also was previously with Define American, which is a group that's been working on immigration reform, immigration policy, bringing awareness, changing the narrative around immigration. And Ryan, as the sanctuary movement really took on its name back in the 1980s, although it had some history before that, around immigration, specifically churches providing sanctuary space for those coming from El Salvador. And Jim Flynn is on here. Hi, Jim. This was the kind of the original understanding of the sanctuary movement that began to arise in the 1980s and became a thing. And then also that changed what they call the new sanctuary movement recently, with sanctuary cities and other organizations taking on the name of sanctuary, but it really was deeply grounded, at least in the United States, in the 1980s with different faith traditions, specifically around the border, that were taking in immigrants, and became a national issue with trials and people that were arrested because they were giving sanctuary. They were called the sanctuary indictments. We can get into a little bit of that history there, but Ryan, thank you so much, first of all, for being involved in sanctuary types of movements and your work with immigration. You were also there on several nights at First Unitarian. So share a little bit about your work, what you know about the sanctuary movement, and then anything you want to add around your experience would be great. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Judd. It's really great to see Father Flynn on the call, as well as Kim Summers, who's I call our movement chaplain in many ways, as well as Rabbi Nadia on the call from here in the community. And Corey, good to have you. I do want to clarify, though, that the idea of sanctuary, particularly in its Christian context, which is the tradition that I come out of, goes back actually hundreds of years. The Latin word "sacer," meaning holy, or sanctus, also holy ground, give us the roots of the word sanctuary for holy place. And anything in my tradition that is sacred is holy. And matter of fact, in World War II, our Jewish siblings were held in some communities in Europe in sanctuary. In the Vietnam War here in this country, some folks that were dissenting and refusing to fight in the war were held in sanctuary. During the Underground Railroad, there were people of faith that were holding sanctuary for folks throughout the entirety of the Underground Railroad. And then you mentioned, Judd, in what some, including Reverend Fife, the Presbyterian minister out west, has called the New Sanctuary Movement. For about 30 years or so, faith communities from across the country have been helping refugees and immigrants who are, for a number of reasons, fleeing violence and trying to seek safety for their families. So there's a pretty long tradition. This most recent iteration is a bit unique, although still relies on certain principles. And I'll let Corey talk about those legal principles. In the immigration front, there's a memo that has stood for a long time from the Department of Homeland Security that protects sensitive locations, people from going into largely schools, hospitals, and places of worship. In our city, what we had is a curfew that has been enacted twice by Mayor Fisher. The first time the curfew was enacted, many folks are aware that the National Guard was called up and ended up going into David McAtee's neighborhood, and that ended up that situation ended up with his death. Actually, we didn't have sanctuary and congregations open at that time. The second time that the curfew was put into place by the mayor last week, in his press conference announcing the curfew, he asked that places of worship open up. And so we had a number of congregations willing to do so, only one of which did so really publicly, and that's First Unitarian Church. And I was there standing right next to my representative, Lisa Wilner, when we called Reverend Laurie, and was there every night providing worship and fellowship and breaking bread with protesters there. But the thing that I want to underscore with this most recent iteration is that the safe space was meant to recuperate, allow some space for community and for safety for those who wanted to peaceably assemble. This is a group of people, I think, for those listening, that here in Louisville we need to keep in mind, understand full well that, especially if they are Black, they're not safe in their car, as we've learned in the cases of people like Sandra Bland. They're not safe in their neighborhood, as we learned with Trayvon Martin, or in the city park, or on the streets, or in the schools. And as we learned with Breonna Taylor, Black women in America are not safe even in their own homes. And so then the mayor puts forward a curfew that requires people to be in their homes where they feel unsafe amidst a season of what many here in the community feel like is of injustice. And then when we open up the church to provide sanctuary in the church, folks are made to feel yet again unsafe, even in a place of worship. And so I'll let Corey and others speak a lot more to the legal case, but for those of us who are people of faith, I think there is also a moral call that many in the community are trying to respond to, including the more than 60 clergy that we've had come down to the park to de-escalate when white nationalists, armed white nationalists, came to create chaos. And I think that through what First Unitarian is doing, through what many churches are doing in donating food and faith leaders are doing to show up, we are trying to bring about a new moral vision for what the beloved community could look like. And I think for those that would have been at First Unitarian, they would have seen that community.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much for the work that you've been doing on there and your leadership in this. Corey, I want to thank you for being on. This is Corey Shapiro, who is the legal director with the ACLU of Kentucky. And Corey graciously agreed to be on, even though he said he's not necessarily expert in the sanctuary movement. You do have some, or hopefully can help us kind of parse some of the legal issues around sanctuary and what may be some of the legal issues related to that. Corey, thank you for being here and welcome. If you want to chime in with any kind of statements or thoughts around legal issues, that would be really helpful for our conversation.
Sure.
And then we may have some specific questions for you. Thank you.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you all for having me, and to those of you who are involved in supporting the protesters both this past weekend and throughout the time. That's such important work, and I just want to thank you for all the work that you all are doing to support them. And so, you know, we were talking about the curfew that was in place, and the curfew that the mayor issued specifically had an exemption for going to or from a house of worship. And we had some real concerns and ongoing real concerns to the extent it comes back, if the curfew comes back, that one of the core principles of when there is a restriction on speech, which essentially the curfew places a restriction on speech, it places a restriction on the ability for the protesters to be out expressing their First Amendment rights. And setting aside the problems with restricting speech at all, if you are going to restrict speech, the government can't discriminate based on the viewpoint of the speaker. And we have some concerns that that's what was happening over the past weekend. So if you were going to, let's say, my synagogue out in, on Brownsboro Road, I don't think the police were there stopping people going if there were services that were going on that night. But if you were going to the First Unitarian Church and they were stopping protesters or people who are going to that church or leaving that church because of it was that church, they're discriminating against on the viewpoint of which religious speech they want to express. Similarly, it's also, you could look at it as another way, which we have concerns about, that they're discriminating based on who it is that's going to practice their religion and seek spiritual guidance at the church. That is, they were protesters protesting against police violence. And only the people who are protesting against police violence were being prevented from exercising their religious speech. And so that's another way to look at that viewpoint discrimination. And so that's a real concern that we have, that is a way that the city was enforcing its curfew. And so we sent a letter to the county attorney demanding that they stop that sort of enforcement of the curfew.
Thanks, Corey. And we may have some specific questions for you here as the conversation continues, and thanks for being on at least as long as you can. So I do want to open it up. We've got a really beautiful group of people that are on the call. Jim, welcome to the conversation. Jim, introduce yourself a little bit, and thanks for being here. You've been one of the leading advocates from working with immigrant issues. Thanks for being here, Jim.
Yeah, it's an honor to be with all of you. And I would just like to say something about the new sanctuary movement. I think it should be simply the sanctuary movement, because the sanctuary idea goes back into Jewish scriptures very well, very deeply. And it's kind of, I see it all on a continuum. And from way back then till the 80s and now presently. So seems like it could be well phrased as the sanctuary movement. So we know that there is a continuum going deep into our faith traditions in the Jewish tradition, and also being resurfaced in the 80s out of nowhere almost, as it were. But that's an observation I'd like to make.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Jim. May it be so. It is now the sanctuary movement. So Jim just made it so. It's not the new sanctuary movement. Yeah, thank you. So the rest of you, if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you're welcome to add a thought or a comment. I'll try to bring it into the conversation. If you're on Zoom, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself to the group. And if you want to add a comment or make a comment or a question, feel free to do that. And you're welcome to do that now if you want to ask a question. Corey will be here a few more minutes and could answer. Mary Lee, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. I put it in the chat because I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to speak out loud. So one of my questions was geared toward the faith leaders who have provided that sanctuary. And that is, what is the response? I'm of a different faith, but I have the same belief that people should be able to express their discomfort over what we have happening with the lack of social justice in our community. But I hear a lot of pushback of, it's too political. What is being done at First Unitarian and other churches that are offering sanctuary. And I just wanted a feel for what the response was, or if these churches, people of faith that had opened their doors, had gotten that pushback, because it's one that I'm hearing a lot. And then also, now that curfew is lifted, does anyone know if people are still gathering down there, having prayer services? Is there any need from us in the community who may not necessarily be in that area, but can provide assistance?
Yeah, those are great questions, and we have several religious leaders on the call here, so I won't see if there's anybody that wants to jump in and engage in that conversation from their perspective. Feel free. Yeah, Jim, would love to hear your reflection.
Yeah, well, I think Mary Lee is correct that it definitely is a political situation, political response, but it's not partisan. And so I think that's a distinction we have to keep in mind. We're not saying this or that or the other about that, on that end of it, but it's, a sanctuary effort is definitely a political effort.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And making the distinction, between political parties and the politic in general, which is the civil question.
Yeah, and let me just add to that and underscore, we, those of us who have been involved in protests locally for racial justice have been equally angry with the Democratic mayor's response as we have the Republican Attorney General's response. For us, it's a matter of moral conscience, not partisanship. But for many of us also in the Abrahamic traditions, we follow scriptural texts and people who in their very nature were political but not partisan. I mean, in my tradition, I follow a Christ who was a person of color, a refugee, a homeless person, and a Jewish person who was a temple goer, who literally led a march into the city on the opposite end of the governor as a political act before he was then crucified by the authorities. And so the idea that we should avoid any public witness, I think, has always been a bit confusing to me. And that tradition has led us to a long history in this country of political witness of people of faith, from Rabbi Heschel and Martin Luther King to Dorothy Day and the like. I mean, there's a long tradition of people getting involved in social movements, which is, I think, what we're a part of. But I do want to clarify, I've heard a number of folks over the last 5 days question whether or not we were having, quote, services within the church. And the first and most simple answer is yes. The second thing I will say, though, is that as a Baptist, I get pretty righteously indignant when I hear a city councilman, as happened yesterday, ask the police chief if they've heard of worship services happening between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. And when I hear politicians or government officials suggesting that it is they who can define not only when we worship, but the type of worship that we're about. And I think that's a dangerous path, particularly in a city where our mayor is the president of the Council of Mayors and has the ability to give advice to all other cities that are having protests on how to handle that protest, and maybe giving advice to perpetuate curfews. And so I just want to clarify that we need to be very careful in our interactions with the government, not to allow government officials to define what it is that we consider worship.
Thank you, Ryan. Corey, I do have a question for you. There was one of the challenges that was showing up, I believe, Saturday night, was could the police officers come into the church? There was some, they were saying that there may have been some members who may have been a part of setting the fire of Dunning vandalism, and so that they could, with a warrant now, and I think that's what needs to be clear. They would have to have a warrant to come into a church, but they could come into a church if they
Correct.
felt like, yeah. So could you explain that a little?
I mean, if they provide the requisite proof to a judge, and a judge determines that there's a basis for issuing a judicial warrant, yes, there's nothing that would stop the police from executing a warrant that was signed by a judge and doing that. I mean, if there was criminal, not that there was, but in the abstract, if there was criminal activity that was happening in a church, it would not. There's nothing that would stop the police from entering the church to stop that criminal activity or to search the church with a proper warrant. But I think the idea that the police would even consider that it was appropriate speaks volumes to the problems we're having with the police force here in Louisville.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the challenges. That we're in this one, that's a possibility, and then the other way in which communication, as Lori said, that there was good communication, at least to some degree, around what was happening, and so we don't want to paint it a picture that's not true as well. But there were some of those moments where definitely people that were in the sanctuary were feeling threatened by the idea that police may come in and arrest people or search for people who had done violence outside the church and had come into the church. Are there any other questions, again, from those of you that are on the Zoom call that would like to ask a question, make a comment? Russ, are you there? You wanted to make a comment?
This is Russ. This is Russ Greenleaf, and you did mention the police being interested in some people inside the church who they believed had been involved in vandalism and maybe setting fires and that sort of thing. So, I'm wondering if Lori is still on the line, what her response is to the idea that some of the people she was sheltering may have actually engaged in criminal activity, and and the idea that there is a segment of the protesters, there's a certain percentage of them who very deliberately want to set fires, break windows, and that sort of thing, and they have not been controlled or expelled from presence. So how did she feel about sheltering basically people who've been doing that?
Well, Lori's not on any longer, so I can't speak for her. I think the situation was not clear whether or not people had done that were in the church or not, and so I can't speak for how she felt about that or what the legal issues would be. I mean, again, if the police officers had right, they could have written up a warrant with the judge. So I can't speak for Lori on that specific thing. There may be other faith leaders here that could speak to their perspective on that. Jim, did you have a thought about that?
No, not about that. Can I go back to what Ryan was saying?
Please.
Just building on what Ryan was saying, that I think on the one hand, you were speaking about the police interfering with worship or whatever inside synagogues or churches. But I think we have to look at it from the other side too. It's time for the people inside the churches to get out of the churches. And maybe the real worship of God is taking place in the streets. And not to say you can't come into my sanctuary, but we're taking the sanctuary out into the streets where our faith traditions, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, that's where so much justice has taken place, not inside the buildings. But justice has taken place with people, with bodies, and with feet, and rather than with any kind of, in my estimation, kind of worship and stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And before Ryan, before you speak, I just want to say, Corey, you do have to run. Thank you so much for being on, and thank you for the ACLU of Kentucky. You all are just amazing people, and the work y'all do. A deep bow to you and your whole team, especially during these times. So yeah,
you are all out there. We're in our offices on our computers, or home office, office is at home. on our computers. You all are out there on the front line. So we appreciate
it takes
you
a
all.
village, right?
Yes.
Everybody doing their own piece. So thank you for doing that
Thank
piece.
you.
It's really important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye all.
Yeah, thanks. Ryan, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Yeah,
go ahead.
No worries, Judd. I mean, I to Father Flynn's wise comment, I completely agree. And I think, you know, as protests have gone on now in Louisville for over 125 straight days, new folks getting out of their pews and into the streets to join folks in calling for a peaceful witness for justice is necessary. That new energy is necessary. It's also what made it so troubling to me on 2 of the 4 nights of this last week to not be able to leave the church. I mean, one night for over 3.5 hours, we had service. People gave testimony. People broke bread together. And were not able to leave the building without arrest or threat of arrest for over 3.5 hours. And so that's what made it so troubling. And to Russ's really good question, I mean, I think a few things. First, God help us if we ever start asking people when they come to synagogue or mosque or church or any house of worship, whether or not they have violated a crime before they come into the building. Because if that is the case, we're going to have some empty seats, especially for those moral things that aren't considered crimes that people get involved in and come to ask for forgiveness for. But I will also say that what is striking to me about what we're experiencing here in Louisville is that all of the traditional means that citizens would have to express their righteous anger, their frustration, and to go about trying to carve out solutions have been boarded up and closed. Our courthouse has been boarded up and closed. The city hall has been boarded up and closed last week. And so those traditional means, instead of opening them up, instead of finding new and innovative ways to give people hope, to give people inclusion, to let us dream collectively for a more just community, instead, what it feels like to the protesters, and that's all I can speak to, is that they're under a siege from authorities who just don't want them to express their voice. And if they do try to express their voice, are told, well, you can't do it in this manner. You can't do it in that manner. So the only way I'm going to give you is a way that you're going to get arrested. And that's unfortunate, because we could be going in a different direction. We could be opening up dialogue and taking tangible steps towards justice.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. And I think as being part of a peacemaking organization, I think my deeper concern about what's going on in the world is, and we saw it last night with the debates, is we no longer have places where humans are sitting with each other and having dialogue around perspectives. We no longer have dialogical space where we can hear each other and be with each other. And the polarization that's happening, partially because a lot of this is over social media, or like we're on a screen right now, the repercussions of the loss of platforms for dialogue and encounter with the other are creating a polarization that we've never experienced before. And the ramifications are, I think, what we're seeing right now that was just manifested last night in the debates, where there are 2 adults that don't, the whole platform is not set up for us to hear each other and to be with each other in our differences. And so I think that's one of the concerns, are what are these platforms? And I think our government has a responsibility to create those platforms where we are able to do that kind of work, instead of creating platforms where we're polarizing each other. And I think that's the real challenge. So us as nonprofit organizations and government need to work together to create new platforms. Mary Lee, do you had a comment or a question, or anybody else that's on? Welcome to unmute yourself and make a comment.
I had a question, but I think Ryan kind of addressed it. But I just wanted to say also real quick that platforms, like, to me, it wasn't the platform that was the problem. It was the people not respecting each other. I mean, the platform could have worked if they respected, or especially one of them didn't respect the other. But
Yeah.
anyway, I just wanted to mention, and this is kind of what Ryan was talking about, but oh, my cat's going nuts. Sorry. I have a friend who's a protester, and we were talking about like peaceful protests versus a non-peaceful protest. And I was saying, she said something about how, yes, sometimes it's necessary. And I guess that's what Ryan was saying, that there's no other avenues. But she was saying like sometimes it's necessary to do more than just peaceful protests because the peaceful protest wasn't accomplishing anything, or it wasn't getting enough attention or something. So I was just wondering, is that valid at all, or I don't know. Okay.
Well, again, I won't speak for everybody here, and anybody's welcome to kind of fill that question, but I think it's valid in the sense that somebody was sharing that from their experience, that the ways in which they've currently been protesting. And I think there's all kind of questions about what we mean by violence. You know, I think we throw a lot of terms in there together, and we need to parse that, like what we mean by violence towards things, violence towards people. Again, I don't have an answer to that, but I think that conversation about how we protest, what does violent mean, are open for conversation. Mary Lee, you also had your hand up. Thanks for the question, and Robin.
Yeah, I did want to circle back to you. Something that Ryan also said was needing new energy and new people to be involved. And I'm looking for ways to be some of that new energy. So are there specific contacts that I need to make? As you can tell, sorry, Jed, I've been in all your calls today.
It's been a great having you. Thank you.
So I am looking for ways to kind of live that out and to, as he was saying, live out my faith. This is my faith tradition. I also agree that as a Black woman, it's tough right now, and I just am feeling like I am being led/pushed to be more involved. So I'm looking for ways to do that. Can you give me some suggestions?
Sure. And Mary Lee, I want to take a moment just to pause and, give you some grace and love, because you are at the fulcrum of all of this that's happening as a Black woman. And we honor and recognize that we're all experiencing this differently. And so thank you for your courage to do that and to hold that space. Here's going to be a little commercial for the Beloved community. There is a group that's meeting on Thursdays at 4:30. Trying to imagine what the Beloved community might look like in Louisville. That has a lot of the characteristics of the Beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King originally espoused. And so you're welcome to join us. That's a small group. It's not a public conversation, but it is a conversation of those that want to find a way through this in kind of some long-term platforms for creating equity, but also racial reconciliation and justice in our community. That's one platform. There are other groups. In fact, if there are people on the call that want to also share that with Mary Lee, places they could be involved. Of course, LSurge is a great group. And let anybody else want to jump in and answer any of those or give some help with Mary Lee. Or even those on Facebook, you're welcome to add groups and organizations. Anybody else want to jump in? Yeah, Jim? No, okay.
Well, I can only add this, and I think what Mary Lee is saying is really beautiful and hard, that there's no path. There's no one group. There's no group of groups. We're making a path as we go. And I think the Black Lives Matters movement is precisely that. And it's exciting. It's hard, painful, especially for Black people and for Black women. But I think what they are doing is making a new path just by doing it. And I don't know what group necessarily that would be most effective in, But wherever you tag on, just be loyal to that one, and realize that there is no clear path that's made out there that we can all plug into, and it's going to solve the problem. I don't know whether that adds anything, Mary Lee, but I empathize with you. I'm stuck in, I can't get out either because of my age and all that. So it's very painful.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. We create the path by walking it.
That's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Yeah. Kim,
Hi,
did you have a
Hi,
comment?
Mary Lee. Absolutely. Hi, Mary Lee. Welcome. I was so moved by your share. It was so powerful to hear you stepping into all that you're here to be right now as we are where we are in this stage of the movement. So on a really practical level, one of the things that my name is Kim Summers. I'm chaplain emeritus at Unity of Louisville. I'm at the Square. I've been there every day, but 2 days. So there's been a lot of relationships built, a lot of young people with deep passions and feelings that are coming up. So that's one thing I invite you and other women in our age category even, to help guide and hold the feelings and be witness to these young people that are down in the park. I know that they appreciate that very much. And it really helps with the whole de-escalation to be seen and heard, as I'm sure you know. And also on the practical level, drop off food, ice, Gatorade, any kind of granola bars, something for sustenance to get us through the day as we're congregating and creating the beloved community in Brianna Square at the corner of 6th and Jefferson in Louisville, Kentucky. Good to see you, Mary Lee. And feel free to contact me on Facebook. I'd love to continue the conversation with you and hear from you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. Anybody else? We got a great group of folks. Yeah, Sarah, please unmute yourself. And thanks for all the conversation that's happening here.
Hey, so I just wanted to answer. I have two great organizations that are a great plug-in. So the first one is the Black Women's Collective. And it's three young Black women that came together, and they're really doing some amazing things. I don't have all the details. I've just watched a lot. I know one of them personally. So, and then the second one is Change Today, Change Tomorrow. This group gives me hope. They are amazing. They do things that we need right now in the community. They feed hundreds of people a day. They have so many activities. I don't feel like they're getting pushed out as much, but they're wonderful. They've built a huge presence in the city compared to maybe before the uprising. So those are the two that I recommend for people to be plugged in. Well, the Black Women's Collective, I believe it's really around Black women. So I usually don't point white people there, but those are the two I recommend, and I'll put their names in the chat. So if you want to go back and look at it, if you don't remember what I said.
Yeah, that'd be great. Sarah, if you'd put those in the chat box, and I'll also include them on the Facebook page live stream so people can pick them up there. Those are really good resources. Thank you. Other people that are on the call, again, great folks on the call, just to make a comment, share maybe your perspective from your faith tradition around issues of sanctuary or civil disobedience. There's a comment on Facebook, looking forward to whenever it may be, to the necessary big table events, woo, woo, that are needed everywhere. We can see each other as humans, all we need to eat. Yeah, and to start is within safe places. Yes, Rochelle, thank you. We can't wait till we can have big tables again for our community. Thanks for that. Other thoughts that points people would like to make, questions people have Thanks for the good conversation. We just have a few minutes left, but would like to have some final comments. Jim?
Yeah, this may not be irrelevant, but in Latin America, especially Central America, they have a chant or that they use a lot. Alerta, alerta, el pueblo despierta. Alert, alert, the people waking up. And I think that's what Black Lives Matter is saying, and other movements too. The people are waking up.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you, Jim. I was reading some about the sanctuary movement, and one of the women, a sister nun that was tried in her statement on her arraignment said, "If I'm guilty of anything, I'm guilty of the gospel." So I love people's faith response when they're willing to, and again, right, we all live in these containers where at times, and I have some fear that, well, I don't know where all this is going to go, but it could get really interesting with civil disobedience again, and the dichotomies that are happening in our community. And all of us are having to ask some of those deeper questions of, and I think it was the statement Reverend Snarden made, that just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right. Right? So there's a distinction between legality and morality. And we're in some of those places of asking deeper moral questions that may mean that our laws become secondary to our deeper commitments that our faith traditions or our own morality require of us. And I wish those weren't always in a dichotomy, but they seem to be moving in dichotomous ways. So we'll see what happens going forward. I think in the last, I like to do checkout. We've just got a few minutes left, and a checkout is anybody that wants to just make a summary statement about what's been meaningful, important, insightful for them during this conversation. And I won't ask everybody to do that, but if you're on the Zoom call and you're willing, if you could say in a phrase, a statement, again, we don't have long, just unmute yourself and share what's been meaningful and insightful and important about this conversation.
I'm going to jump in quick. Any of
Please,
you all,
thanks, Mary Lee.
If any of you all who are doing the work need to be encouraged, what I need you to know is that you have been acting out exactly what my soul needed to see and hear this week. I have been in a place of, when you have racial trauma, sometimes that will just rear its head in a really ugly way. And I've been feeling the effects of that. And the silence from my family of faith and my church family has been deafening and discouraging. And what you all have been doing in this past, those of you who are being hands and feet and who are really acting on this, what you have done is give me back a sense that as a person of faith, that we can live out our faith in a way that is just and is right. So thank you for the work that you have been doing.
Thank you, Mary Lee. My checkout is exactly what you just said. So Jim, you have a checkout?
I've been kind of thinking and pondering this intersection between sanctuary and what Russ mentioned about concern about people who may have been involved in violence. And it seems to me that I remember that in the Hebrew tradition, there were sanctuary cities where people who had committed even capital offenses could flee and find safety. And I think even in the temple, the altar was seen as a place of safety. And so, I think I don't know how to deal with that. It just strikes me that was a theme, that the sanctuary wasn't just for people who were, quote, the nice people. It was also for people who may not be considered to be all that nice. And then the other piece of that is that the question of what is violence and what isn't it kind of, in many places, when I hear even people in my own congregation talk, it's just that anytime a whole bunch of people congregate and they're frustrated and they're angry and they're calling for justice and they're loud, that feels threatening, and so it gets lumped in there with violence, right? And so a lot of people, I think, have a hard time sorting out between, what is a violent protest and what's a protest. And I've tried to help people understand that anytime you're protesting or demonstrating for change, you are going to upset the apple cart. You can't help. That's the very nature of the beast. And so I think part of the job that many of us may have is trying to help people see that protest is inherently disruptive. And if it threatens your sense of privilege and security, it's going to feel violent, even if nobody's throwing rocks through windows and doing that kind of stuff. And so, I've just been struck in that conversation about sanctuary and safety and how we define what is, in a sense, violent and disruptive. I don't know that I have bringing that to conclusion anywhere, but just been rummaging around in my mind.
No, thank you, Jim, and thank you for being one of Louisville's faith leaders for all this time. You've appreciate those reflections. I don't know, I'm not going to say this right, but when you've had privilege, for those who have privilege, equality feels unfair. I don't know how there's a better way to say that, but I think that's your point, Jim, is that, anytime we're being disrupted from our power and privilege, we may feel like that's violent towards us, and it's not, and how do we parse that? So thanks for that point, Jim. Anybody else want to check out?
I do. I just want
Robin.
to thank you for hosting all these great talks and events. And also I wanted to say, the sanctuary movement is really important. However, I just wanted to add, and I know everybody already knows this, but it's really, really important to vote. And I know everybody here is going to vote, but I just wanted to say, just please encourage everyone to vote, and because we can do all this stuff, and if we don't vote, it's like, what are we really changing?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Yeah.
Okay.
Carla, you had put some great comment in the chat box. Would you be willing to unmute and share that as a checkout?
Hi. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Carla.
No, I just wanted to tune in and understand really the needs of the protesters. I guess this has been a great discussion, and just like I said, I think it's really important to provide, the protesters a way to remain peaceful if they choose, so adds validity to their cause. What I'm really struggling with is that if there was a way to, like Jim was saying, it's all, happening all at the same time. There's no one movement, but if there was only a way to sort of put specific reforms out there that the movement would like to achieve, I think the citizens who are rejecting this whole idea of the protesters might seem to understand that, it would behoove both sides for these changes to come around. But anyway, I really appreciate listening to all your voices. I don't have much more to add. I'm just learning.
Well, we all are, Carla. Thank you for engaging. This is the platforms that we need to have, right, to create dialogue and us be able to hear each other. Again, a couple of quick checkouts. Would love to have anybody check out.
Hey, it's Sarah. So I'm not on the ground, but I know a lot of protesters, and they have never seen UU in this light before. And I am seeing people that are not believers, like they are so grateful. It's like I believe like Friday and Saturday night shifted a lot of people's faith in the movement and in the faith community. And we are all, as a society, faith is what drives us for the most part. And it does feel like, or a lot of people I know, like this safety thing, like they could breathe for a minute. And now knowing how you all have always been rooted in social justice, people are seeing it, and it just feels like people could breathe a few breaths knowing and seeing this. So yeah, I just wanted to share that from my perspective of what I'm seeing and reading in comments, and I've always known how wonderful UU is. So, but just really seeing that is just it just warms me for a little time, and because then you look and it's like something new is happening that's bad. So anywho, but yeah, I just wanted to share that.
No, thank you, Sarah. And I love that image of creating sacred space as a space where people can breathe. That's deeply theologically and philosophically profound, and that our religious communities can really drop into, there's this huge movement away from organized religion. And yet in moments like this, we see that these deep practices, these deep theologies, this deep grounding of a group of people who commit to each other and do these practices. It's in times like this, that these communities do their practice, right? And so that we can show up ready to go in these kinds of moments. And so I appreciate the hope that this can re-inspire our religious communities and people to have faith again in faith houses, right? So thank you for that, Sarah. Any final checkouts? Yeah, would love to hear anybody check out with what's been meaningful or important.
Thank you, Judd, for having me on in this great group. Minister Stachel Bussey reminded me the other day of the progress that can come out of great chaos. And Helen Keller said that faith is the strength by which a shattered world shall emerge into the light. And I'm struck by Carla's question that amidst everything that's been going on, we should not forget that 2 of the officers that were involved in the shooting are still employed by the police department. Protesters are asking directly for them to be removed. The transcript has still not been released, although it appears that it will be, from the grand jury investigation, and the truth shall set you free. And Shamika Parris-Wright and Attica Scott, 2 local leaders within the movement, have charges that many who were present believe to be fundamentally false, and those charges should be dropped. And so those are the three of the many asks that protesters have been making. And I would just also caution us to understand that any dismantling of an entire system of injustice will never have just one ask. It can't be a singular solution, but as we dismantle different elements of it.
Yeah, thank you. And there are a variety of organizations that are putting out asks. A lot of those interlock and very similar. The IMC, the Interdenominational Ministerial Coalition, Empower West. Then there's smaller groups, Black Lives Matter, organizations that are making statements around policy change that they really feel needs to happen. So I think it's our job to listen to those, to come alongside those, to highlight those, and to move those forward. Thanks. Thanks for that question. Well, any final words of wisdom or thoughts that need to be shared? Well, on behalf of Interfaith Paths to Peace, a deep bow to all of you for being a part of conversations like this and participating in these kinds of forums. Again, you're always welcome to join in the beloved community conversations that are ongoing. A diverse group of folks that are trying to figure out how we can practice the beloved community. What are the practices and principles of beloved community, and how can we move those forward? Ryan and Lori and Corey, the 3 folks that we specifically asked to be on, to give you a word of thanks, and then for all the wisdom on the call. Yeah, just beautiful people here with a great deal of wisdom. Thanks for sharing that with us. And Jim, again, a shout out to you and all the amazing work you've done in this space for so many years. You're kind of you're like a Yoda. You're like a kind of the Yoda of the movement for a lot of us younger folks, and not as young as Ryan, but thank you for the deep wisdom and the way you've lived that out faithfully. Thank you all for joining us, and feel free always to join IPP in the mornings. We have at 9 o'clock devotionals from different religious traditions that ground us in our connection with the holy or the spiritual, however we define that. And then we have 3 o'clock conversations every day. So feel free to come back and join us in those conversations. Tomorrow, we will be having a conversation on the beloved community. It's going to be an appreciative inquiry process where we're just going to ask people to name where they see the beloved community emerging. It's so easy to get into naming what's wrong. And there are a lot of things wrong. But it's easy for us to get focused on those things rather than highlighting what's working, what is right, where is grace and love emerging in our lives and in our community. So tomorrow at 3 o'clock, join us for what's called an appreciative inquiry process around the beloved community. Thank you all for joining today, and peace be with you, and may you have a just and equitable and peaceful day. Thank you.